That's right. That's the crazy, you can call it clickbait topic if you want. That is the topic. Now, why would I make a video suggesting there might ever be the $100 million Bitcoin? Well, let's put this into context. There are no more than 21 million Bitcoin ever going to be created. At least not unless the consensus of the core developers changes. Do they have an interest in doing this? No. Why? Because it would mean that each Bitcoin they hold would decrease in value if they were to expand that number. And that is kind of the whole purpose of Bitcoin. To have a limited supply, hard cap, and expanding that number would not only devalue it profusely just by sheer quantity changes, but also by demand changes, because people would trust the network far less if suddenly the consensus of the core devs was, hey, you know what? We're going to change the hard cap and make it not such a hard cap, right? And start doing shenanigans like the Fed does, or the central banks around the world. Oh, we're just going to print more money. And people will just believe it's worth more. It doesn't work that way with Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin uses Austrian economics as a principle, basically. The value of a limited supply asset increases over time as demand increases and supply stays the same. Now, of course, you can say, well, they're still making more Bitcoin. Yes, over the next 120 years, less than 10% will be added to the supply. And at the same time, people continue to lose it here and there, little bits and pieces, shocking as that may be. People still do, to this day, lose their keys, lose their wallets, whatever, because they're sloppy about their management, or they give away their passwords because they're foolish. When they get, they socially engineer themselves to get hacked. It happens. Meanwhile, the fixed supply is a fixed supply. And even if you send your Bitcoin into the void, and it's lost forever, there's still a hard cap of 21 million. And even if only 15 or 16 million of them are ever available, by the time they're all mined, and maybe it'll even be less, then the people who hold those 10 to 15 million Bitcoins will be the holders of an asset that for now has a growing demand and a fixed supply. And with every halving, we see that the demand goes up and the supply goes down, and therefore the price follows. Now, of course, it's the VEPs, the volatility, the entropy, probability, and statistics that determine when and how much the price changes, because the price follows the returns of the means, right? The returns on the log investment, right? Or log investment of returns. Right? And the mean of the log investment of returns is how you determine how much return you get. And the standard deviation of the log returns on investments, also known as the standard deviation of returns, is the volatility that actually determines what the price is, because the volatility and the correlation tell you the direction of that move. So, how can there ever be $100 million Bitcoin? Well, technically, it could happen right now. How? Well, if you really wanted to nuke the system, you could, in theory, have two wallets and simply send yourself from one wallet to another one Satoshi, the grand old price of $1. Technically speaking, for that instance, If one Satoshi is worth $1, that means that one Bitcoin, which has 100 million Satoshis in it, would be worth $100 million. Now, would that price last? Well, at the current rate, probably not. Why not? Because the market at the moment does not support that. That does not mean you could not game that and attempt to do that, because it remains an unregulated asset in an unregulated market. Now I know you'll tell me, well, the recent ETFs, that means that there's regulation on crypto. No, it means that there is some regulation applicable to the jurisdiction of the United States and people who are allowed to trade within its borders, even if they're overseas, on a certain asset and a certain asset class. But it does not mean that there is regulation on the protocol. Why? Because it's a decentralized protocol run by servers all around the world, many of whom have competing interests. And that, in fact, is its biggest regulatory tool. It is the competing interests of the miners and holders who do not, by any means, want to change that status quo, because adding random regulations from every jurisdiction in the world would only cripple the growth and adoption of the asset. Now, of course, governments, especially those who want to hold more of it, do not like the fact that it is so decentralized. And that's why they're trying to get as much of it as possible, so that they can try to control it by brute force. But here's the fact. There is not enough computer power available for any single government to actually do that. Why do I know that? Well, because even if the United States were to brute force attack crypto with all of its power and target Bitcoin specifically, you know what would happen? The developers of the SHA-256 algorithm would, first of all, not even sweat, because the difficulty of mining the blocks would increase dramatically if so many computers were suddenly added to the network to try to mine it, if that was their brute force attempt. If their additional brute force attempt was simply to force the ledger to change, as in an actual brute force crack attempt, well then guess what? The core developers of the Bitcoin network will simply, that has been in place for a very long time for the specific purpose of this. And that is, they would change the SHA-256 algorithm to a different algorithm. And there's more than one in place to do that. Well, what if quantum computers become a thing? Well, if and when quantum computers are ever to the point where they are targeted on a cryptocurrency, by then already there will be more than one player with said type of computers. Well, how do you know that? It took many years for some countries to catch up to the tech, to other developments. Right. However, speed at which countries and organizations are catching up is increasing, just as the tech itself is increasing, because the tech is increasing in speed. Which means the lag time between when one country has quantum computer power and another country has quantum computer power, and many organizations have quantum computer powers, is decreasing moment by moment. And if you think that Google or the NSA or whoever are the only organizations in the world right now that have the top quantum computers available, all I can say to you is we have another thing coming, because there are plenty of organizations in the world working to build top quantum computing machines. And do not be surprised if the United States is not top dog very shortly. They may be in the top tier, but they may very well not be top dog. Why? Because investments in R&D in the United States have plummeted for decades, while investments in R&D in places like China and India have increased dramatically, because they realize that the thing that made the United States the top dog for the 20th century and so far into the 21st century was all of the R&D investments that the United States made really since the late 1800s. And for some reason, because of corporate profiteering, short-sightedness, etc., the United States has decided, yeah, we're just interested in profits. We don't care about the tech so much. Let it slack off. We'll control the world because we're so rich. See how long that lasts when you're not the top tech dog. As soon as you lose that competitive, technological, scientific edge, you lose the power of your wealth incredibly quickly. In fact, you could even say it effectively evaporates overnight, because it does. How do I know that? Well, you can look throughout history. The Iron Age, the Bronze Age, right? The Industrial Age, all these different ages. As soon as a player comes out with a better technology than the rest of the world, and they take pole position, the former superpower fades not only into second place, but usually into obscurity, and more often than not, completely disappears. Now, am I predicting the demise of the United States as a global superpower? No, not right now, because the US still has nukes, etc. But again, those nukes take a lot of money to maintain. That big army the US has takes a huge amount of money to maintain. Do they still have the ability to call in debts from other countries? Yes. Are they likely to do that before they lose power? Yes. Is that likely to secure their place long term? No. The only thing that will secure their place long term as a top tech leader is to focus again on investments in R&D, science, engineering, math, STEM, technology. Until that happens, it's very likely the U.S. will continue to decline in status and in power with its STEM capabilities, while others who are upstarts or who have long been investing in STEM take greater and greater shares of the top tier. And eventually, if that doesn't change, well, it is very foreseeable that the US will fall out of first place and quickly fall far below that. What are the implications of that? Well, if you like democracy, if you like personal freedoms, that's a very bad thing. Because the United States has been a bulwark defending personal freedoms, civil liberties, democracy for, well, a long time, right? You could say, yes, but there hasn't really been civil liberties for more than like 60 years in the U.S. When the U.S. finally had, the civil rights movement in the mid-1960s, and that women weren't even considered equal until the suffragette movement, and even that was only white women, right? And there was slavery before that. So the first couple hundred years of U.S. history was pretty marred with things that were not exactly just or defenders of civil rights. And all of that is true. However, that is why the United States operates on the ambition of always working to form a more perfect union. Meaning it's not perfect. The U.S. has an ambition to be more and more perfect over time. Well, that cannot happen if you lose your status as the world leader in technology through sciences and math and engineering. And it's why in the Constitution of the United States, right, it is enshrined that science, right, artful science that has use and purpose is a very important part of the society. And until the United States government, party politics aside, decides we must regain our edge, or we must maintain our edge and increase it, once again, we're going to see that lead be chipped away ever so slowly and ever so quickly. And before you know it, overnight, there will be a new tech leader in the world. And it may be very ugly for people who like the notion of freedom and some kind of democracy, representative democracy, or whatever. So, again, why does this mean that there's potentially 100 million Bitcoin available in the future? Well, while you could try to gain the system now, right, by selling yourself or selling to a friend a Satoshi for $1 or buying a Satoshi for $1, the market wouldn't necessarily sustain that. However, when you consider that really, even if 10% of the world has apparently a crypto wallet and some small amount of those wallets have some Bitcoin in there, it's really not more than a couple percent. 1 to 5% actually have any, useful amount of Satoshis at present. That means we still got like another 95% to go. Even if it's 90%. Okay? What is the price of Bitcoin going to be? When not only every millionaire realizes, I can't own even half of a Bitcoin because there's like more than 42 millionaires in the world and there's only 21 million Bitcoin available. If you include all the billionaires and millionaires, there's more than 42 million of them around the world. Or even if it's 30 million, okay? There's still far more millionaires and billionaires than there are Bitcoin available. Therefore, not everyone can own even one, and even a half is out of reach because, frankly, the big whales don't own one Bitcoin, do they? No. They own hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. That's right. That means most people will be lucky to have a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin. So it means it is entirely possible to see easily within the next decade $1 million Bitcoin, or possibly even $10 million price for a Bitcoin. And it's not unreasonable to think that within 120 years, when all the mining is done and inflation continues as it has been going, if fiat even survives anywhere near that long, and that is not likely, that there will be a demand for Bitcoin at price levels where 100 million is obvious. Why? Because by then, people will be trading, buying and selling goods, earning salaries in Satoshis. They will not earn whole Bitcoins. They will earn Satoshis, right? And if they're lucky, most likely, they'll earn in altcoins that have far lower value, but are far more accessible because they have a greater current supply, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, you can always expand the amount of material available within the BTC network, even without increasing the actual overall supply of BTC. Why? Because you can divide Satoshis into many pieces, right? Milli Satoshis, micro Satoshis, et cetera, You can make very small amounts of them and divide it so that essentially you can keep supplying with the same amount of Bitcoin for smaller pieces of it so that people can earn in smaller amounts. And so that salaries may effectively be paid in Satoshis, and people will be spending milli-Satoshis and micro-Satoshis to pay for their goods and services. So, is it possible there will be a $100 million Bitcoin price, and that there'll be some whales who have hundreds of thousands of these, or that Satoshi's wallets, have more than 1 million of them, will stay silent forever? Yes, it's entirely possible that the price could reach $100 million one day for a single Bitcoin. Does it have to be? No, absolutely not. Are the probabilities that will happen in the next decade? No. But is it possible, even probable, that it could happen within 120 years? There are, in fact, decent probabilities that that will happen. So for now, enjoy your learning about Bitcoin, and happy trading. Cheers.